Thank you all for being here. It's very exciting for me to read in front of you today. Carrying your poem made me remember my first confession, and my second confession was to my mother when I had to tell her that I didn't think what I had to tell the priest was good enough, and I made a few things up. And then I had to go back and I had to confess that.
Oh, wow. But it made you were a future fiction writer, though.
The piece I'm going to read from you today is a work of creative nonfiction. Like a lot of my stories, it's been told many times. First time I told the story was in letters to friends and family when I was living abroad in Tunisia for a year, and I was experiencing some of the things that are in this essay. And then the second draft of it, so to speak, was when I wrote an autobiographical novel that has never seen the light of day and has never been published. And then only in this iteration, in the last couple of years, did I come back to the material and decide that the agent that I had way back in the day who said this is really memoir material, it's not fiction material, I thought I would see if she was right. So this piece is called Welcome to the Hotel Sabra. I stood on the doorstep to the bland, whitewashed building just off the Place des Martyrs, the place of martyrs. Duffel bag digging into my shoulders, hands aching under the load of the manual typewriter and suitcase of books I'd carried from the more expensive hotel where I'd spent my first 2 nights in Tunisia. It was September 1989. On a whim, or so it seems to me now, I had left the university in England where I had been enrolled as a master's student to take a job teaching English in a Saudi-built faculty of letters in Kairouan. The man who offered me the job, a shadowy figure I knew only as the head of English, had promised to reimburse my airfare and give me an advance on my first paycheck as soon as I arrived in the country. But that hadn't happened. Instead, I'd been told by another man, the doyen of the university, that the 5 classes I was on the hook to teach would begin in a little over a month, and I'd better get busy putting together syllabi and writing lectures. That's fine, I said in halting French, but I spent all my money just getting here. What am I supposed to live on until my pay arrives? The man shrugged elaborately. Life is cheap here. I'm sure you'll be fine. Then he looked at his watch as if to say, sorry, that's all the time I have for you. And I was escorted back to the front gates of the administration building where the taxi that had brought me from town stood waiting. Fuck, I said under my breath as I crawled in the car. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Where to now? The driver asked. I don't know, back to the hotel, I guess. I lied about being broke. The truth was I still had a couple of hundred English pounds, my escape money, as I thought of it, stashed away in a pocket of my duffel bag. Before leaving Exeter, I'd done the math on what it would cost to book a return flight from Tunis to London and from there to New York, where a woman had promised to put me up till I could catch a Greyhound back to Kansas. The answer was every last penny I had. And now, after paying for the taxi and my bill at the first hotel, I had even less money to fall back on. Hence, my decision to check into the Hotel Sabra, where my dog-eared guidebook had described the place as the least expensive hotel in town after a few in the Medina that lacked modern plumbing. I waited until the front door opened behind a departing guest, then slipped inside the narrow hallway and set the typewriter and suitcase on the tiled floor. You wish to check in? A man behind the front desk asked. How many nights? I don't know. 1 for now. You're English? No, American. Ah, American, he said, taking my money. But then, why are you staying here? Because I'm not one of those Americans, I said, reaching out to take the room key that he dangled before me like a talisman. As a child, growing up in western Kansas, I had often dreamed of adventure. The nuns at my tiny Catholic school were great lovers of globes and maps of all kinds, most of them outdated. During history or social studies, they'd use a ruler to point out certain far-flung places in the world, particularly the Holy Land, and a few countries in Asia or South America where their order maintained a presence as missionaries. I couldn't have cared less about missions or missionaries, but I loved gazing at those maps. I wanted to leave my home in Kansas and explore exotic locales. I wanted to ride with the Caliph upon his magic carpet. In taking an academic position in North Africa, I was furthering all of these ambitions, but I had a countervailing voice in my head too, the voice of my father. As a teenager, I'd toiled countless hours with him on the hardscrabble farm he bought in the early 1980s, along about the same time that John Mellencamp and Willie Nelson were organizing the first Farm Aid concert. My father is a stoic by nature, a man of few words, but every once in a while the desire to communicate certain hard-learned truths comes over him. One of his favorite hard-earned truths is the idea that people spend too much time worrying about what he likes to call the first mistake. Look, everybody makes mistakes, he'll say. It's inevitable, just another part of life. What you gotta watch out for is the second mistake. The one you make right after the first one, usually in some kind of misguided attempt to justify or erase it. As an example, he offered a neighbor of ours, a real estate agent who'd once made the mistake of transporting an open can of gasoline in the trunk of his Coupe de Ville. Of course, the gas spilled all over the carpeted trunk, my father said. That much was inevitable. But what do you think our genius neighbor did next? I'll tell you. He drove straight to one of those do-it-yourself car washes and tried to vacuum up the whole mess. No way, I said. What happened? What do you think happened? The gas went straight up the hose, hit the vacuum's heater element, and kaboom! Exploded in a great ball of fire. These words of my father's came to me unbidden as I sat at a sidewalk table in a cheap workers' cafe on the Avenue Bourguiba, a few blocks from the place of martyrs. Assuming that taking the job in Kairouan had been my first mistake, what, I wondered, would be my second? If I stayed on in the country, I'd soon be without money to get back home. But if, on the other hand, I turned tail and ran, who knew what adventures I might be foregoing, or when another opportunity like this would come along. As I weighed these points, a boy on a smoke-spewing moped pulled up in the street before my table. English? Francais? No, American, I said, growing tired of this familiar game. Very good, come on, I have something to show you. What is it? Come on, I have something to show you, he said again, shifting forward on his moped to offer me a seat on the back. It's not far. You're crazy, I said with a laugh. I'm not going anywhere with you. Come, he said again, revving the engine on the moped so that a fog of blue smoke filled the street behind him. I crushed the cigarette I had been smoking and stood up. Hurry, the boy said. I hiked the rucksack I was carrying onto my shoulders and stepped over the back of the moped, and seconds later we were careening down the Avenue Bourguiba in the direction of the place of martyrs. At the gates to the Medina, the boy took a sharp left turn, nearly upending a vegetable cart. I leaned into the turn along with him, hands gripping the side of the sputtering moped. The cobblestone streets of the old town were thick with foot traffic, and the boy had to slow the moped to a crawl, honking its squeaky horn as he weaved through women, in headscarves and men in long robes. "It's not far now," he said over his shoulder. "What's not far?" "The shop of my friend." We turned down one winding street after another until finally we pulled up in front of a carpet shop with Visa and American Express stickers in the windows. Here, the boy killed the motor on the moped and left it parked on the stone sidewalk as he escorted me into the cave-like shop. Colorful carpets adorned the walls and sat in great stacks on the floor. As my eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness, a thin, dapper man in his late 20s or early 30s rose from a desk at the back of the shop and came forward with his hand outstretched. "I am Habib," he said in English. "Please sit." He gestured at a little table with a chair on either side, just to the left of the shop entrance. "You've got it all wrong," I said with a short laugh. "I'm not a rich American. In fact, I'm flat broke." "American?" he said, looking me up and down. "But your clothes are English." I followed his eyes and looked down at my beetle boots and ratty black blazer. "I was there before I came here." "Ah, I see." He unbuttoned the front of his suit jacket and took a seat at the little table, leaving me no option but to sit too. Then he said something in Arabic to the boy, who nodded and left the shop at a run. "What brings you to Kairouan, my poor American friend?" I had to laugh at the man's joke. Maybe I was laying it on a bit thick about being poor. When the boy returned with 2 glasses of Turkish coffee, I began to speak more freely about my situation. My airfare had not been reimbursed as promised. The job at the faculty was way more involved than what I had been led to expect. The master's thesis I had failed to write in England was still unfinished. My parents in Kansas had not heard a word from me in weeks. "These are small matters," the carpet dealer said, sipping his coffee. "One must have patience. The airfare will arrive in time. The pay will arrive. All will be well, you'll see." "How can you be so sure?" I asked. "You said it yourself. You are professor. Very important position." "Yeah, but..." He waved this off and stood. "Now I will show you some very nice carpets, very cheap for your mother in America." He rang a little bell, and 2 men in sandals appeared from the back of the shop and began to hold up one carpet after another. Blue carpets, red carpets, tan carpets. "Are these not beautiful carpets for your mother in America?" the dealer asked. "Yes," I said, "they're beautiful." "Which one do you like?" I pointed to a red magoon with tassels on each end. "That's a nice one, but as I told you..." I know. Très pauvre." He made a shooing motion, and the men rolled up the red magoon and lay it on the floor next to our feet. Then he looked at me. "We are in the old town, where tradition requires us to barter and haggle over prices. But I do not wish to barter with you, my friend. I wish to help you." "Really?" I said doubtfully. "And how are you going to do that?" He reached into a drawer in the little table and brought out a tiny calculator and what appeared to be a contract with blank spaces for names and numbers. "You pay for part of the magoon now, in English pounds, and the rest later, after your pay from the faculty arrives. In the meantime, I'll hold the carpet for you. It's more than fair, don't you think?" Who could say what was fair and not fair? All I really knew was that I was sick to death of my own indecision. I needed to make a move one way or another. I needed to do something. All thought of first or second mistakes be damned. And so, reaching into my rucksack, I pulled out all the money that I had on me at the time and counted it out on the little table. Came out to a little under 100 pounds, roughly half the money I'd brought with me from England. "Well done," the carpet dealer said. "It feels good, doesn't it?" "What feels good?" I said. "Why, to believe, of course. To know that all will be well." "If you say so," I said. But as I walked through the streets of the old town, headed for my tiny room at the Hotel Sabra, I knew that he was right. It did feel good, very good. The time of indecision had come to an end. All that remained was to act and to see where my actions took me. I had a month before the fall term at the faculty got fully underway, and I decided to use the time to produce the first draft of my overdue master's thesis on the doubling motif in the novels of William Faulkner. In a hole-in-the-wall paper shop just outside the Medina gates, I stocked up on pencils and papers and ribbons for my pancake Olivetti, then retreated back to my room at the Sabra, where I dragged one of the bedside tables before the open windows and set the little typewriter upon it. Spread out on the bed behind me was an array of notes, index cards, and marked up books I'd separated into 5 piles, corresponding to the 5 chapters of my unfinished dissertation. I let a short pause fall for dramatic effect, then rolled a sheet of paper into the carriage of the Olivetti, found the center page, backspaced 6 times, and typed in all caps, INTRODUCTION. And so it began. Each morning, I hammered away at the Olivetti as a biblical scene complete with beggars, horse-drawn carts, and merchants hawking goods played out below my open window. Then, sometime after 1 or 2 o'clock, when the rush of the lunch hour was over, I'd venture into the streets around the hotel in search of the cheapest meal that I could find. Usually, this was some version of the plat tunisien, which consisted of French bread, couscous or rice, a spicy salad of peppers, tomatoes, and olives, a couple of lamb kebabs or merguez sausages, along with French fries and brique à loaf, which was an egg fried in a pastry sheet. And to drink, monsieur? The waiter would ask in French. Just water. Eau mineral? No, from the faucet. But are you sure? Of course, I'd answer. By saving a dinar in the mineral water, I was able to stop in another cafe on the way back to the Sabra and indulge in an espresso or a glass of Turkish coffee to power that afternoon's writing session. As a rule, I didn't eat dinner, subsisting instead on fruit and little tubs of yogurt I bought from the street vendors. This, along with cigarettes and the continental breakfast brought to my room each morning by the hotel staff, sufficed to keep hunger at bay. When I wasn't working on my thesis or wandering the streets in search of cheap food, I wrote long letters to my parents in Kansas, to the English girlfriend I'd left behind at Exeter, and finally to the woman in New York who'd offered to put me up on my way back to Kansas, should I make it that far. In these letters, I characterized the life I was living as one romantic adventure after another. My dealings with the carpet dealer alone took up 3 or 4 pages, and I lavished similar attention on the harvest moon outside my window, the groggy voice of the holy man calling the devout to prayer, the faces of the children mobbing me on the street to beg a pencil or a cigarette. Donnez-moi un stylo, donnez-moi une cigarette. Having finished one of these missives, I would carry it with great urgency to the post office, where a man in a denim tunic would weigh the letters, sell me stamps bearing the likeness of President Ben Ali, and then cancel each of the stamps individually with a series of loud cha-chings from his manual postage marker. What a wonderful sound that was. But then, a few weeks into this routine, I began to have trouble with the hotel manager, a nervous, fastidious fellow with a neatly trimmed mustache who would watch for me to return from my errands and accost me just inside the door to the hotel. Monsieur, your bill is growing very large. When do you intend to pay it? Don't worry, you'll get your money, I'd say, making a beeline for the stairs. I'm an American, a professeur, remember? Tomorrow then? The man would ask, following me. I'll put an updated bill under your door. You do that, I said. I'd be back at my typewriter when a sealed envelope containing the updated bill would appear beneath my door. Rarely did I bother to open it. What was the point? By this point, I could not have paid it if I wanted to. Then, one morning, I started work on the final chapter of my thesis. The manager's pleas grew more insistent, and a terrible row broke out between us in the hallway outside my room. "Monsieur, you must pay your bill today or I will telephone the police." "Go right ahead," I yelled back at him. "Monsieur, I am serious." "So am I." So it went, each of our voices rising in volume until guests in other rooms began to stick their heads outside the doors to see what was going on, and the hotel manager stomped angrily back to his perch at the front desk. I listened to hear if he would follow through with his threat to call the police, but he didn't. I knew then I had to redouble my efforts to finish the thesis. I worked at a fever's pitch for the rest of the day and into the night, stopping only to drink water directly from the sink in my room. Around midnight, another row, this one about the clack, clack, clack of the Olivetti, broke out between me and a group of Australians who were staying in the room next to mine. I switched to writing longhand for a couple of hours, then started back in on the typing as soon as the morning call to prayer rang out above the rooftops. I was down to the last few pages of the thesis, the last few paragraphs, the final sentence, the final word. Elated, I returned twice, centered up the page, backspace twice, and hit the pound key 3 times. Pound, pound, pound. As later calculations would reveal, I had typed roughly 47,000 words in a little under 20 days, an average of almost 2,500 words a day. But how short and meager are our triumphs in this life. No sooner had I typed that final pound than I was assaulted by a bout of vomiting and diarrhea. I stumbled down the narrow hallway, ignoring the dirty looks of my fellow hotel patrons, and locked myself in the water closet. The diarrhea poured out of me in a series of convulsive torrents, one after another after another. When I thought they'd finally passed, I stumbled farther down the hallway to the shower, sitting in a ball on the dank floor as the water rained down upon me. Every 5 minutes or so, I'd force myself to stand and gulp water directly from the shower head, for I was as thirsty as I had ever been in my life. But drinking the water brought no relief at all, just another round of diarrhea. For most of that day, or at least the parts I can remember, I did little but shuffle back and forth between the closet-like rooms, WC to shower, shower to WC, so bent over with cramps I could barely stand. Hotel guests from up and down the hall pounded at the door to the WC, demanding their turn. But all I could do in response was moan and repeat the same words over and over again. Je suis désolé. Je suis désolé. Je suis désolé. My voice, little more than a whisper. Finally, I stumbled back to my room and tried to sleep. But as soon as I began to fall off, I'd be wakened up by a fever or stomach cramps and have to rush back down the hall for another round. I lay on my side in the shower and wept with exhaustion and disappointment. Finally, there came a commotion of voices and sustained pounding at the door. "Monsieur, open the door at once! Monsieur!" I did as I was told. Seconds later, I was pulled naked from the shower and carried back to my room. From then on, I was attended around the clock by the hotel manager, or more often a small boy, a street urchin as nearly as I could tell, whose bare feet did not reach the floor from where he sat in the bedside chair. But perhaps I imagined the boy, as I imagined so many other things. For example, my father pulling up at the base of the hotel in one of his ranch pickups and honking the horn for me to come down. "Hurry up, the cattle are out again." "I'm coming, Dad." Or my mother dipping a wash rag into a basin of cool water and pressing it on my forehead. "How are you feeling, son? Would you like something to drink?" "Yes, Mom, water, please." I was delirious much of the time, so drained by dehydration and fever that I could barely lift my head from my sweat-stained pillow. This much I do remember, or seem to. Every hour or so, two men would appear and force me to drink from a pitcher of cold, milky white liquid I later learned was water that had been used to boil rice in a nearby restaurant. I hated the smell of the stuff and would clamp my mouth shut every time the men arrived, but the resistance was futile. As one man held my mouth open with calloused fingers, the other poured the milky liquid into the back of my throat and then held my mouth shut tight until I swallowed. Meanwhile, the hotel manager stood nearby, nodding solemnly. Very good, very good. Give him all he can take. Yes, that's the way. Give him more. Otherwise, all I remember is the holy man making his ghostly call to prayer 5 times a day and the sound of cart horses clip-clopping in the cobblestone street below my window. The horses, I'd think. I have to get down to the horses. I have to feed the horses. But then the fever passed, and I woke to find the boy. For he was real enough, after all, dozing in his chair beside the table. I said something to him in a gruff whisper. His eyes flew open in fright, and he ran from the room, shouting something in Arabic. A moment later, the hotel manager appeared beside my bed, his face sweaty and full of emotion. Monsieur, you're awake? Yes, I said. I'm hungry. Can I have some bread or café au lait? Café au lait, the manager said, bringing his hands together at his chest as though in prayer. Monsieur is awake. He asked for bread and café au lait. He called down the stairs to one of his minions, and then came back into the room and sat down in the chair beside my bed. Oh, we were very worried, monsieur. You can have no idea. The doyen himself thought you might die and have to be admitted to the hospital in 2 weeks. The doyen, I asked, he was here? How long have I been sick? Almost a week, the manager said, blinking back tears. But all is well now. The fever is past. You're going to be okay, inshallah. Only then did I begin to understand just how sick I'd been. A week later, with classes at the faculty set to begin any day, a taxi pulled up in front of the hotel, and a small brown man in a green tracksuit got out and came up to my room. I am Monsieur Henri, the man said in French, extending his hand for me to shake. He was maybe 60 years old, a tiny man with a wrinkled face and closely cropped gray hair. I have a petit appartement for you to rent in Rue Ibn Khaldun. As he said this, the hotel manager appeared in the door with a tray of coffee and some of the local sweets called macroud. He set the tray on the desk before the open window and hurried back out. Eat, Monsieur said, offering me a macroud. Afterwards, I'll help you gather your things, and together we'll go see the petit appartement. I don't understand, I said. I've run up a large bill here. I won't be able to pay it, or you, until my salary arrives. On the contrary, Monsieur said, picking up a piece of macroud and biting into it with tobacco-stained teeth. I understand very well, and none of what you say matters in the least. It doesn't? No. He shook his head firmly. What matters is that you leave this place immediately and come and live with me and my family in Rue Ibn Khaldun. The rest can wait until your pay arrives in October or November. November or December? Who knows? He dropped what remained of the macroud in the middle of the tray and made a face as if to say, the pastries at Chez Henri are far superior. These things take time, he said, offering me a cigarette and lighting one of his own. One must have patience, I said. Ah, yes. And then all will be well. Yes, you see now. Very good. I did see, and hear, and taste, and smell. All around me, the world was exploding in all its glorious and awful details. Its 5 a.m. calls to prayer, and street urchins begging pencils, and garbage strewn across alleys for stray dogs and cats to pick through in accordance to Scripture. my part, small though it was to stop worrying about any of it and start living instead. Thank you.
Karen and Rob, if you'd be willing to take a few questions from the I have a question. What happened to the woman from New York?
I promise you I didn't feed Kyle that question. I didn't feed him that question.
She started smiling. That's why you knew it was.
Yes.
I mean, so is this a real story then?
Oh yeah. It's creative nonfiction. You know, it's a curious thing. One of the things writing this I think really taught me was I really felt, as a lot of writers feel who are inexperienced writers, they don't know how the world works, they don't know how writing really works. You know, I worked on that novel set in Tunisia for 4 years, and the whole time I felt like it should have already been done. It should have been finished. What the hell's wrong with me? 4 years. And only later did I meet a lot of novelists, and they're like, 4 years is nothing. You know, but at the time it felt like I couldn't finish it. But one of the things that those 4 years of writing fiction every single day did for me is when I went back to write creative nonfiction, I realized that I wanted my creative nonfiction to be dramatic, to read like a story, and to have scenes, and to have action, and to have characters. And everything in that story is absolutely what happened. Before I wrote it, I was able to go back and read all those things that I told you about, the letters, the first draft of the novel, and so on. And I added to it just what in my classes I call the theme speak, just like, you know, the themes of the story, the meditation on the themes, and that's it.
I have a question about the story in general.
Mm-hmm.
Why was the manager so intent on the guy coming back to live with him and his family?
Well, he had, as it turned out, I found out later, he was retired. His family lived in a compound. They had their own house. But in his retirement, for retirement income, he built a 2-bedroom apartment next door inside his own compound, and he only had one of them rented. So, and he often rented to foreign professors who taught at this university. And so what happened was, the doyen comes by and sees me and like, what the hell is this guy doing? Why is he at this hotel? And, you know, why is he, you know, I'm sure Mr. Armory heard about it. He's like, oh, there's my other apartment filled. But the other thing is, I just think it was, I really felt like it was an act of kindness on his part too. I really felt that when he came in, that I was being rescued. That's what I felt like.
Did you get your rug?
You know, I got the rug. It said Alyssa will tell you when I finally did take that plane trip from London to New York, it's about the only thing I was carrying. That and a typewriter. That was about it. So I still have it. Yeah.
You had mentioned writing every day for 4 years. Would you mind sharing with us a little more about your writing practice and sort of what advice you'd have?
Yeah, you know, it's changed over the years. It's sort of evolved over the years. I used to really write like, and I still have this tendency too, but I try to fight against it. I used to really write like I was sending my writing slave into the fields. You know what I mean? Like, get to work on that thing you were writing yesterday and do not stop for 3 hours, right? But, you know, when I was in grad school in Buffalo, one of my fellow students was a poet named Juliana Spar. I remember I was talking to Juliana one day, and she was kind of a quiet person. She did not cut a big figure in this big, you know, grad program with all these language poets and everything. She later was more successful than all of them, but I asked her that question one time, and she said, you know, I write every day for 2.5 hours, every day. I try to do it at the same time of day, so it's scheduled. My only rule is I can't do anything else. I have to write during this 2.5 hours. No other rules. None. If I want to write in my journal, I write in my journal. If I want to work on an old poem, I work on an old poem. I want to do a new one, I'll do a new one. But I do not mess with my writing time and turn it into something negative. Turn it into something, sometimes when you're on deadline, you have to do it. And I think one of the things I've learned over the last few years as my writing time got less and started to feel more compressed, and the more I had to sort of fight for it, the more I also realized I need to enjoy this. You know what I mean? I need to have fun. Not to say that I'm going to have all the fun and the reader's not going to have any fun. I mean, you got to create fun for the reader, but you should enjoy it too. So I think it's a discipline, but I think it's a discipline that should be something that you look forward to doing, and looking forward to doing it is not necessarily going to be natural. It's going to be, you have to be something that you cultivate, that you do enough that you come to look forward to it.
Does sitting and just thinking about the story you're writing count as part of your writing?
Yes, absolutely, but I don't typically do that ever. What I'll do is, if I go to work if I'm going to work on a piece of writing, I have a notebook next to me, and if I can't work on the piece of writing I'm writing, I go into the notebook and I write about that. And it's so boring. I mean, when you write about can't seem to get going today or whatever, you're only going to write a few lines, and then you're going to be like, okay, so what's going on? What's standing in my way? Maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. And oftentimes I'll do that for just 15 minutes, and then before I even know it, I'm writing the thing again. You know what I mean? I'm writing again. But I tricked the writer's block, right? I tricked it. I didn't allow myself to sit there, stare at a blank screen or stare at a computer. I went to my trusty longhand notebook and just let it rip. And then I found my way back to the writing. And so that's one of the things that I do. My writing consists of writing longhand, typing up what I wrote longhand, I count that, printing out what I typed up and marking it up, I count that, inputting the changes that I've marked up, I count that. It's like I count it all. I love composition. I love the first part of it. But in order to be good as a writer, you got to steal some of the joy from that and put it into the rest of the process. You know what I mean? You've got to learn to find ways to make the revision process fun too. And so that's what I try to do. Hi, Sue.
Hi, that was really wonderful. And I had a few travel adventures in my youth too, but nothing to rival that, nothing to come close to that.
What about COVID in London?
COVID in London, that was actually in Bradford.
Oh, yeah, okay.
COVID in England was an experience, but I mean when I was young. But I wanted to ask you, this is kind of a more personal reflection, but when you look back at the Rob of the story, the Rob that took place in, that took part in the events that you're recounting, and you think about yourself now, what do you think about that Rob? And what parts of that Rob do you think are still part of you, or do you want to try to, preserve as part of your current self? I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think if you think about if you only think about this in retrospect, you rarely think about it when you're in the moment. But when I look back at what it was like when I was in my 20s, I see two parts of myself. One is taking everything very seriously, right? Everything very seriously, and having, feeling a little bit of a pressure coming from myself. But I also was spontaneous, you know what I mean? Adventurous, looking for adventure, looking to meet new friends all the time, this kind of thing. And I think when I look back on that person, what I think to myself is, I don't ever want to be that serious again. You know what I mean? Or put that kind of pressure on myself. I want to work hard, but I want to enjoy it. But I got to try to get back I always want to try to find ways to get back to that sense of adventure, that sense of something new. And sometimes I succeed. Like earlier today, I got to go have I started trying to learn to play guitar about 18 months ago. And then I did face-to-face lessons, and then I did online lessons, and I decided to go back to face-to-face lessons. And I went to do my face-to-face lesson over in, what was that, Circle City Industrial Complex? Anyway, that's where he's got his studio. And he's this guy from England named James.
James not nice.
There you go. And I was just in there from 12:30 to 1, you know, playing, knocking on heaven's door, and we were just jamming. And I was like, this is so great. I mean, this is like a great. And so that, I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I'd like to try to get. I'm trying to get back to a little bit. Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question about vulnerability, which is perhaps related to what Sue just asked. As we grow up, particularly when we're trying to make our mark on the world, admitting our vulnerability is extremely difficult, and I think it's not always healthy on us to not be able to do that. Even I think, you know, part of our national consciousness is about not admitting vulnerability, and we take that in and do with it what we will. But I'm really struck that the way, you know, the story arc leads to this closure, where in one sense you have accepted the vulnerability of your situation and just said, oh, to hell with it, I'm just gonna be here, and it's all gonna be okay. Finally, that to me seems like, you know, a moment where you get to say, I'm vulnerable, it's okay.
Right.
Is that how? I mean, how did vulnerability play in your own mind as you're writing?
You know, I think you know, if you think about how it plays out in the story, you know, I was delirious during much of the time, so I think a lot of my thoughts about it are kind of in retrospect, more than I was thinking about it at the time. But I lost control.
Yeah.
I lost complete control of the situation.
Everything.
I mean, the only reason that I didn't die is because they broke down the door, and I've got several doctors that are very close by here, and one of them was an English major, and he's supposed to be examining me, and we're always talking about all this stuff, and I was like, what was the deal with that rice water? He was like, that's exactly what they should have done. You know what I mean? It was like an actual remedy for dysentery, and so I think that's part of it, Jane, is just you get to a point where you're like, I'm dreaming that my family's going to come help me. Help me. I'm trying to tough it out like I'm going to solve all of it, and I can't solve all of it. You know, at a certain point, you have to just kind of give it up.
You know, I remember when you came for your job today, and you read a part of your earlier novel.
Right.
And what struck me as I was hearing this, well, I don't remember the part about your dad saying the first mistake, the second mistake, which is part of that theme speak you're talking about. And I also don't remember, you probably didn't read about dysentery to us when you were applying for the job. So it's just, you know, this isn't really a question, it's just more of a comment. It's just so fascinating to me to see the metamorphosis of what I remember from your novel, and then to have that interiority, that reflection, the bits about your family, all get woven in. So
you know, I think when I was writing the novel, I was writing it in first person, but I wasn't really letting the character be me, and I also wasn't sufficiently distinguishing the character. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the character,
which fiction writers often struggle with.
Right. So one of the freeing things about going onto this draft was just like, all right, it's me. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I would have been thinking, and this is how I would have dealt with it. And so I think, and my agent at the time, I mean, I say like my agent, like she never sold any of my stuff, and I never made any money. But she was like, yeah, this doesn't work as a novel. I mean, you know, to completely rework it as memoir. And at the time, I wasn't really ready to do that. Terry?
Given the intense dramatic and narrative nature of your nonfiction that you talked about earlier, I'm sure that what you read is 1% of the story. And I hear from my students a lot, and they always, this semester, for whatever reason, they're saying, well, I don't want to describe too much. And I say, keep going, you know. But how do you know when to stop? You know, because there's so much more detail. How do you know when to stop, save a detail or a little sort of narrative kind of tangent or other little thing that road that you could go down and come back to the core of what the essay is about?
I'm almost tempted to ask some of my students, because I keep hammering away at this, but What I say is that it often happens in revision, okay? First of all, you gotta put the reader there and make it vivid. Make it a vivid experience so the reader feels like they're along with you and experiencing it at the same time. And that's hard to do, and the only way you can do that is by putting in the sensory details, the smells, the sounds, all that. You gotta put it in there. So in the first draft, let it rip. I mean, get it in there, make it as vivid as you can possibly make it. But then what we talk about in class is that the kind of the gold standard for creative nonfiction, I feel, is when everything in the piece, or almost everything in the piece, is in service to the theme, or is in service to the themes. And anything that's not in service to the theme has to go, right? So when I was reading, I haven't read this in a while, but when I was reading, there was a couple places where in my head I was going like, is this in service to the theme, or should I cut, or should I cut this part? Is this part going on too long or whatever? You know what I mean? But I think that's the thing, is that you have to tell a story. It has to all be in service of something, but you can't forget that the story, the essay, takes place in the mind and the ears and the heart of the reader, or the listener, and you got to give them what they can to make it work.
For example, Place des Martyrs,
Yeah.
very appropriate.
Yeah.
What you went through.
Yeah, and it's absolutely real.
Yeah.
If you go to Carouan, you can go to Carouan right now with Google, right? Like with Google Earth, and I was there the other day, and I was like, oh my God, it's still the Place des Martyrs, and it's still the Hotel Sabra, and it's still the same color. So yeah, that. But you also have to appreciate those details when you come to them. You're like, you know what, that's important. Sarah?
What was the distance when you chose to write this as creative nonfiction? Where were you, like how far distant from the events were you?
Oh man, what was it, Kyle? It was just a couple of years ago. It
Okay,
was
so recently.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was probably 2019, and I don't even remember what. Back in my very serious days of trying to be a writer, I took my typewritten drafts. This was before I used computers, and I took them down to that little place on State Street in Washington and had them bound. Okay, so I've got all these bound rough drafts, and now since then I've got thousands of pages of rough drafts that I don't even care about. But I had this first draft of this novel that I wrote on a typewriter, and it's just sitting there. It's like it's like a doorstop or something, and I just picked it up one day and started reading it, and I was like, maybe I can steal from myself. I think that's how it happened.
Was your master's thesis accepted?
Yes, it was. I was thinking that I would bring a few visual aids. Like I still have the pancake Olivetti. Do any of you younger people, do you know what a pancake Olivetti is? It's a typewriter that's called a pancake Olivetti because it's a typewriter, but it's only this tall. It literally looks kind of like a laptop, and it's really, really small, and they call it pancake, and it's very lightweight. So I could have brought that. I could have brought the rug, but I didn't know Alyssa. She's part of the rug. And then what was the other thing? Oh, my master's thesis, which was written on that typewriter.
And we have time for maybe one more question, if there is one more. This is probably the best Q&A we've ever had at one of these.
Can I ask Karen a question?
Sure, yeah,
Is
go
that
for it.
okay? Unless somebody else wants to go.
Go for it.
Okay, Karen, you find prompts. You said the first poem that you read was based off of a prompt you were given. How did you walk?
Yeah.
Do you find them freeing or restrictive? And what do you like about them?
I
And
don't
also,
know.
how do you memorize your poems?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Sort of, kind of. I love prompts. I love when someone tells me what to do. And it was pretty non-restrictive as prompts go, just like it has to be about Monument Circle. So then I just kind of spent a couple hours there studying the iconography of the monument. Of course I paid attention to it before. I went down a bunch of rabbit holes that I ended up not using. It was just great fun. So yeah, I'm a big fan of those.
Well, let's give a round of applause to Karen.